Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another video. Today we're talking about love rituals in a marriage, or intimacy rituals in a marriage. And rituals are those routines that you have created intentionally in your marriage that just reinforce your connection and reinforce your devotion and your love and communicate that love and devotion for each other. And as I read this chapter in the book Take Back Your Marriage by William Doherty, there it is, I have to admit, I'm challenged. I'm personally challenged and challenged to do better at this in my own marriage, and I'm just going to pass on the challenge to you guys. And again, maybe you've never really thought about this subject. I guess I don't really think much about it. Haven't thought much about it. There's just kind of habits that you develop, some positive and some negative in your marriage. And I've been forced to really think about it as I read through this chapter, and I want to share them with you and let the challenge pass on to you. So one of the things he talks about is, in the West, our marriages are not arranged. We feel like that's the better option, and I agree. I wouldn't want my parents to pick my bride. But one of the challenges that comes from this that I've never really thought about was he says that if you think of it as like a pot of water, you have this pot of water that's cold and you heat it up slowly and finally it reaches the boiling point. Okay. And he says in arranged marriages, the water starts off as a cold pot of water. This couple doesn't know each other. They're just put together based on the thoughts and plans and intentions of their parents. And over time, they're supposed to, in their engagement with each other, their interaction with each other, and over the years, hopefully that relationship will become more intense and will heat up. But in America, or in the Western world, where we choose our own mate, it's like we start our relationship with the water at its hottest point. So the water's boiling when we get married. We're feeling all of the eros and all of the phileo kind of love. And over time, what often happens in our marriages is the water cools down. And so it's an interesting metaphor to think about. Was your marriage at one time a boiling, hot water, and now, it's cooled off? And of course, the challenge is why has it cooled off, and does it have to remain that way? Of course, there's no reason why, with some effort and some intention and some agreement, that the water can't get warm again. If couples in other parts of the world start cold and work up to warm, at one time we were warm, and maybe we've gotten cold over the years. Can we get back to warm? Well, of course we can, or hopefully, we can, if there's some agreement that there's a desire for that. So I think that's a good way to begin this chapter. When he talks about love rituals, he says they're often kind of goofy things that wouldn't make sense to somebody outside your marriage. Like if you were in a long drive, for example, and you hold each other's hands on the drive, and maybe at every hour, you squeeze each other's hand to say I love you with your hands, and the other person squeezes the hand back a couple times, I love you too. Or maybe you say, hey, it's the dawn of a new hour, I still love you, or whatever. Or any of these kinds of love rituals, they sound kind of goofy to people who aren't in the marriage, but that's okay. They're not intended for those who aren't in the marriage. So you want to think about, how do we communicate our love to each other in routine ways? And maybe there's some new ways that we could begin to initiate saying I love you in maybe nonverbal ways or in other ways. Of course, one of the things he talks about is dating in the marriage, and we often kind of let that go to our own detriment. We should continue dating, and not just going to movies or places where we're just sitting next to each other, but places where we can actually engage and talk in conversation and have an enjoyable conversation, where we don't have to focus on all of the problems. We don't have to focus on all of the logistic problems and the family problems and the health problems and all those things. But we can actually just share, information with each other. It's kind of interesting to think about, but like if you were to go out to lunch with a friend at work, you talk about, maybe you might talk about, well, what's it like, you're 30, getting to your 30th birthday, or what's it like having 2 kids, or what's it like moving from Colorado, or whatever those subjects are. But then in our own marriage, sometimes we forget to have those basic conversations. We're often so busy talking about logistic problems like getting kids to dance recitals and all that kind of stuff, that maybe we don't sit and ask the questions like, hey, you just turned 50, what's that like for you? Or you just turned 45, what's that like for you? Or what do you hope to be doing in 5 years from now? That might seem like kind of a strange question to ask your wife, but we ask our friends those kinds of questions. And, maybe we need to open up to some, I guess, just treating your spouse like they're a person. I guess I'm kind of embarrassed to even say that, but, we get so familiar with our spouse, we get so familiar with our husband or our wife, and we kind of like clam up, like either maybe we don't want to ask questions because we're afraid of what they'll say, or we don't ask questions because, oh, we already know what they're going to say. We already know how they feel about that. We already know what they think about that. Or maybe we just don't want to pay attention. Maybe in this consumer-oriented world that we live in, we just don't really care. We just don't really want to pay attention. We want to just, focus on what we want or think about what we want to think about. And just learning to treat each other like people again, like real people with real emotions, with real hopes and dreams, and just initiate those conversations again. And you can't do that when you're watching a movie. You can't do that when you're jogging together, or you can't do that when you're out with friends, socializing. But there needs to be some time when we just sit maybe on a park bench or go for a walk around a lake or sit at dinner. And what is that? That's dating. That's what that is. That's dating. Doing something enjoyable and then having meaningful conversation and showing affection. And that would be so helpful to everybody's marriage if you could just begin there, no matter what the temperature of the water is in your marriage, whether it's boiling or whether it's gotten cold or whether it's just lukewarm. If we could just say, you and I go out, let's walk around the lake, let's go out to dinner, let's play putt-putt golf, whatever, laugh together, goof off, and then just have meaningful conversation and show affection of holding hands and, those kinds of things. So, good stuff. He talks about sex as a love ritual. And one of the things that's interesting is he points out that, in the olden days, maybe people were very prudish about sex and they thought like, well, if, it's bad, it's dirty, and you should only do it when you're trying to have a baby, otherwise it's just, they kind of look down on it maybe. And then now in our culture, it's kind of reversed into a very consumer-oriented expectation. Like, I deserve to be quote-unquote sexually fulfilled, and it's your job, to make that happen. And so what that can cause is couples that think like, well, if I'm not in the mood for it, then we're not doing it. And his point is sex itself can be a love ritual in that it draws you back together. It brings you closer together. And it shouldn't just be, what can I get out of this? But is this something that's needed right now for the health and for the harmony in the marriage? So I like to think of it rather than being a taker, what would sex mean for you in your marriage if you thought of yourself as a giver? Because the culture around us kind of trains us to be takers. And what would your sexual relationship look like, or how would it be any different if you approached it as a giver and as a ritual that your marriage needs in order for you to maintain closeness? And he says, well, sometimes people will say, well, we can't help it. We have different schedules, or I'm a night owl. I don't like to go to bed at 8 o'clock. She wants to go to bed at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I stay up till midnight. And one of the things that, you might counsel that couple is, well, why don't you go to bed at the same time? And then once the other person is asleep, then you could get up and, go read your books or get up and do your, bring your work home or whatever. But maybe make the going to bed together a ritual, at least for 15 minutes or so. Lay down together, talk, hug, exchange information, whatever. And that might lead to a more intimate relationship. But then, there's no reason why you couldn't get up and then after 15 or 20 minutes and then go back to whatever it is that you would normally do. And that might be a good beginning point, maybe to help think of bedtime as a love ritual. Let's see. Intimacy occurs when two people are open with each other in a way that is deeper and more vulnerable than the way we generally experience everyday life. So I think, we need to think of ourselves as friends, but remember that we're more than that. And intimacy, you can have very strong love for somebody that you have zero intimacy with. Intimacy is the ways in which you demonstrate and show that love. And opening your vulnerable self up and sharing your heart, your thoughts, dreams, and hearing their heart and their thoughts and dreams. Your dad might love you, like he'd take a bullet for you, but maybe he'll never have those kinds of interactions with you. And so intimacy, if you're born after 1950, in the psychological culture of our day, people long for intimacy. They expect there to be intimacy in the marriage. In fact, that's one of the reasons why couples often get divorced, is because of a lack of intimacy. Intimacy is about sharing your heart. It's about sharing who you are and receiving that information back from the other person. And just because you love deeply doesn't mean you're very good at being intimate. And so that's something for you to think about and something to ask yourself, how could I be more intimate or more open, to intimacy in our relationship? Interesting thought. Understanding why intimacy is difficult in marriage is one of the most important things that we could learn. And so just because you're married, it's weird that you can sleep together and have this very personal, private relationship with each other, but then really not be very intimate in terms of actually sharing hearts and actually sharing, mind and heart. And so intimacy rituals can help that, leaving notes for each other, or maybe pet names for each other. He talks about one couple, that when there's going to be a plan for there to be a sexual relationship, maybe the wife would light a candle in the bedroom as kind of to signify to the husband that tonight's going to be a special night. That's an intimacy ritual. That's something that's done that clearly communicates something within the confines of that marriage that only the husband would understand. That's a intimate ritual. And so it's an interesting concept, and I think it's something that I need to be paying more attention to. I need to be thinking about more. And hopefully it will inspire you and provoke you in your own marriage to begin thinking about maybe how often you take each other for granted, and then what kind of rituals that you could experiment with and begin, or maybe shoulder up and firm up to make them more consistent. That might be ways to help provide safety and security for your home. As always, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys for going on this journey with me. I'm bringing you the best information I can find on how to succeed as a person, how to be present to life, and how to be more engaged with your own marriage and more engaged with your family. Thank you, guys, and I'll see you next time.